The Volunteers, Chapter 2, Preparations for War. At home in 1905 the Carey family consisted of Alfred, the father, who was a self-employed painter and stainer, and Martha, his wife. The eldest child was Alfred, who was 20, and Sidney, the youngest, who was 5. It was a family of 6 boys. The eldest 4 were at work, and 2 girls. Lillian, the eldest, was 16, and remained at home to help the mother. The family had moved yet again, this time to Kensal Green, a suburb of Paddington. It was necessity to find more room to accommodate the 8 children. In 1906, soon after his 17th birthday, Albert turned up at the Kensington Volunteer Rifle Corps headquarters by appointment, to fill in the necessary forms and take part in the medical. If these were accepted, the recruit had to swear allegiance to the Queen. It had been a bit of a wrench leaving the Boys' Brigade, for he had been a keen member. It had been 8 dedicated years, taking part in all the drill competitions, the gym, and playing the piano for the Sunday Bible readings. He left at the same time a number of friends did, having discussed joining the Territorials. It was an auspicious time, not that Albert and his friends realized the significance. After swearing in, the lads were led to the quartermaster's stores to receive their uniforms. This to them was the most exciting part, as they all fancied themselves walking down High Street, Kensington, in their new uniforms. The colour of the cloth was field grey, with shaped cuffs. The buttons tarnished, just waiting for all the hard work to turn them into sparkling brass. The helmet was grey too, and looked very similar to a policeman's helmet, plus a spike on the top. All the fittings, the spike, the badge and chin strap, came separately, also needing much cleaning. The recruits were handed a kit bag to carry the boots, socks, shirts and vests, plus the belt, scabbard and bayonet. It was not going to be easy to carry this lot home, that's for sure. The Kensington Rifles were now adopted by the Royal Borough of Kensington, and granted permission to take the borough's coat of arms, mounted centrally within an 8-pointed star, as a cap badge. The Kensington Volunteers moved to a purpose-built headquarters at Adam and Eve Mews, Iverna Gardens, Kensington, in 1908, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel W. H. Young. The 4th Middlesex North Volunteer Rifle Corps, Kensington Rifles, under the reorganisation of the Secretary of War, amalgamated with the 2nd Middlesex, representing the London boroughs of Kensington and Fulham. This amalgamation joined North and South Middlesex under one battalion, to be called the London Regiment Territorial Force Association. The 13th County of London Battalion, the London Regiment Kensington, transferred to a territorial force with its headquarters and A and H companies at Iverna Gardens, Kensington. In January 1909, the Army Council declared the battalion should become a line regiment bearing colours, relieving the battalion of its rifle designation. Brigaded with the Queen Westminsters, the 16th London, Civil Service Rifles, 15th London, and the London Scottish, the 14th London, in the 4th London Infantry Brigade, this became known as the Grey Brigade, mobilised for home defence at the start of the war. The regiment's headquarters was positioned close to the home of Princess Louise, daughter of Queen Victoria. King Edward VII was approached by the regiment to ask if Princess Louise would associate her name with the regiment. He was to give his consent. She took an interest in the regiment, organising the design and production of the regiment's colours. The colour was duly consecrated and presented to the regiment by King Edward VII at Windsor on the 19th of June 1909, and thereafter the regiment was referred to as the 13th London Regiment. The Princess Louise, 4 years later, consented to give her name to the regiment. In 1914, the 1st Battalion were billeted in the White City Stadium, and there they waited to go to France with the Expeditionary Force. The 2nd Battalion were at Abbots Langley, near Watford, and there they were training at summer camp for home service, and the 3rd Battalion was recruited much later. If you were to see a film of London's population at the turn of the 19th century, you would be able to pick out all those people who had a lot of money from those who had very little. Their dress would give them away. The rich women wore long dresses made out of silks and satins, wore flamboyant hats and fur stoles, and carried a parasol. They did no work but run their house through the efforts of servants and cooks, planning the week's programme and menu in advance. Their husbands, many were absentee landlords, living off the rents of property, stocks and shares, wore frock coats, bowler hats, and astrakhan-collared overcoats. Income tax at the time was very low, allowing surplus money to be spent on clothes, houses, horses, and carriages. It was a very unequal society. The poor children wore rags, went barefooted, and were frequently undernourished. They lived in tenement blocks and back-to-back houses with no sanitary arrangements except a community lavatory and tap. Many children lived away from home under bridges and populating derelict houses. All the different strata of society wore clothes appropriate to that level, not attempting to copy their so-called betters, but maintaining their station in life. The rich looked upon the poor as unfortunate. Some, socially minded, did so with embarrassment. Others felt guilty. That there wasn't greater equality was for sure. The mass of the population were struggling with the day-to-day survival. 3/4 of all adults earned less than £160 per year. The gap between paying income tax or not widened during the Edwardian period. Almost 60% of the population were living more than 2 to a room. Many of these unfortunates were housed in the workhouses on a diet of half a pint of milk and 5 ounces of dry bread for breakfast. Dinner, the main meal of the day, consisted of 1.5 ounces of fatty roast beef, 4 ounces of potatoes or other vegetables, and 6 ounces of some sort of pudding, usually a concoction of suet and flour. As for supper, half a pint of water and milk mix of cocoa and 1/4 pound of seed cake. And it was this diet, if it was succeeded, that of the workers' families whose wage might be 20 shillings a week, 30 shillings were considered a good wage. Alfred, a self-employed painter, earned about 40 shillings a week. Fortunately, these were times of feverish activity industrially and economically. Employment was high for Britain, was preparing its defences, and the work demanded by the railways and house buildings kept the labour market busy. The working week was sometimes more than 50 hours, and even though employment was high, there was always a fear to be laid off, of being out of work. Trade unions were weak, and the law gave very little protection for unfair dismissal. There wasn't any unemployment insurance or social security. A family could be thrown out of their house by the landlord for any trifling excuse. The Prime Minister, Sir Henry Campbell Bannerman, held an election just after Christmas in January 1906. It was a wise move, for the result was a landslide victory for the previous Liberal Party, gaining 84-seat majority over all other parties. The election had been fought on issues of education, Chinese slavery, and tariff reform, which the Liberals presented as a likely increase in the cost of food. It was an exciting time for those who left the Boys' Brigade, witnessing the massive public excitement. They all went to Trafalgar Square to see the huge screens erected there displaying the projected election results. It was agreed by Parliament on the 31st of March 1907 that a sum of 2,353,000 be granted to His Majesty to defray the charge of barrack construction for works, buildings and repairs at home and abroad, including purchase of land. This was a bill acknowledging that something had to be done about modernizing the army, improving the living arrangements. On the eve of war there were 132,000 private cars on the roads. During the last few years before the outbreak of the First World War, Britain had developed department stores, chain stores and cooperative stores. It was unusual to buy items direct from the manufacturer or farmer. Costly items, such as suiting and shoes, might be ordered and made to measure, but most goods were made in standard sizes and weights. Harrods and Selfridges were graced by the middle classes. Lipton's, the Co-op and Grand Universal stores had been built up on the needs of the working class, catering for volume sales with small margins. British society had become more tolerant. It was possible to alter one's class, to move up. There was greater understanding for the poor, homeless and handicapped. The Factory Acts did protect workers. Reforms allowing trade unions and the introduction of the welfare state continued to this day. Britain was becoming more civilized. This improvement in living standards came from invention, new technologies and entrepreneurship.